My name is Nora, and I'm 58 years old. I never thought that my own kindness would be thrown back in my face like garbage on a Sunday evening. As I sit here in my kitchen, sipping chamomile tea and watching the autumn leaves drift past my window, I can still hear their cruel laughter echoing in my mind. You see, sometimes the people we try to help the most are the ones who respect us the least. And sometimes it takes losing everything you've cooked with love to finally find the strength to stand up for yourself. Before I share this story with you, where are you watching from today? Please hit that like button and subscribe to hear the rest. I promise this tale will teach us all something important about boundaries and respect. 3 years ago, when my husband Robert passed away from cancer, I found myself rattling around in our 4-bedroom house in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, like a marble in an empty jar. We had built this place together 32 years ago, raised our 2 children, Daniel and Sarah, within these walls, and filled every corner with love and laughter. Now, Daniel lived in California with his wife and twin boys. Sarah had made her home in New York with her husband and daughter, and I was left with nothing but memories and my golden retriever Bella for company. As a retired nurse with a decent pension, I wasn't hurting for money, but the loneliness was eating me alive. The house felt too big, too quiet, too full of ghosts. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me of Robert's footsteps. Every empty chair at the dinner table made my heart ache a little more. That's when I decided to rent out the 2 upstairs bedrooms. Not just for the extra income, but for the company, for voices in the hallways, for the feeling that this house was still a home. I posted an advertisement on Craigslist in early February, describing the rooms and mentioning that I was looking for respectful tenants who would appreciate living in a family atmosphere. Within a week, I had dozens of responses, but one stood out. Madison Thompson, 28 years old, contacted me with the sweetest message about how she and her boyfriend, Tyler, were young professionals looking for a safe, clean place to get back on their feet financially. When they arrived for the viewing on a cold Tuesday afternoon, I was immediately charmed. Madison had long auburn hair and bright green eyes that sparkled when she smiled. She wore a vintage dress and talked passionately about her work as a social media influencer, though she admitted she was between projects at the moment. Tyler was 26, tall and lean, with carefully styled dark hair and an easy smile. He worked part-time at an electronics store downtown while pursuing his dream of becoming a rapper. They walked through the house with genuine appreciation, Madison commenting on my collection of antique teacups, and Tyler admiring Robert's old guitar collection that still hung in the living room. They seemed like the kind of young couple Robert and I would have welcomed into our home without hesitation. When Madison hugged me goodbye and called me a blessing from heaven, I knew I had found my new housemates. The rental agreement was simple: $800 per month for both rooms' utilities, included with shared access to the kitchen and living areas. They promised to keep their spaces clean, respect quiet hours after 10 p.m., and treat the house like the home it was. Tyler looked me straight in the eye and said, "Ma'am, we'll take better care of this place than our own parents' house." Madison nodded eagerly, adding that they just needed a chance to prove themselves as responsible adults. The first week after Madison and Tyler moved in was everything I had hoped for. They arrived with just a few boxes and suitcases, traveling light, as young people do, and settled into their rooms with minimal fuss. Madison would chat with me in the kitchen while I made my morning coffee, sharing stories about her childhood in Seattle and her dreams of building a successful online brand. Tyler was quieter, but polite, always saying good morning when our paths crossed and complimenting me on the fresh flowers I kept in the front hallway. I welcomed them properly by baking a batch of my famous chocolate chip cookies, the same recipe I had used to win over my children's friends for decades. Madison practically squealed with delight when she tried one, declaring them better than anything from a bakery. Tyler ate 3 in a row and asked if I could teach Madison the recipe. For a moment, sitting around my kitchen table with these 2 young people, laughing and enjoying my baking, I felt like I had a family again. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, at first, things began to change. The music that drifted down from upstairs grew a little louder each night. What started as soft background melodies became thumping bass lines that made my bedroom ceiling vibrate. The laughter that had initially warmed my heart began to sound less joyful and more raucous, often continuing well past midnight when I was trying to sleep. In the kitchen, I started noticing small things. The milk that I had bought on Monday would be completely gone by Wednesday, with an empty carton left in the refrigerator. My expensive vanilla coffee creamer disappeared overnight. Dirty dishes would appear in the sink, sometimes sitting there for days until I finally washed them myself. Madison began borrowing ingredients for her cooking, taking my olive oil, spices, and even expensive saffron without asking. I told myself these were growing pains, natural adjustments that came with sharing a space. They were young, probably not used to living with someone from an older generation. I had raised 2 children and knew that sometimes you had to model the behavior you wanted to see, rather than constantly correcting and nagging. So I quietly replaced the milk they drank, bought extra groceries to account for their appetites, and cleaned up their messes without comment. When the music got too loud, I would put on my noise-canceling headphones rather than march upstairs to complain. After all, at least the house was full of life again. At least I wasn't eating dinner alone every night in silence. The first real warning sign came on a Saturday evening in March. Tyler had invited 4 or 5 friends over to play video games in the living room. I didn't mind. Initially, they were young people having harmless fun, but as the evening progressed, their behavior became increasingly problematic. They raided my refrigerator completely, eating leftover lasagna I had been saving for Sunday dinner. Finishing off a bottle of wine Robert had been saving for a special occasion, and consuming an entire sleeve of crackers and a block of expensive aged cheddar. When I came downstairs to make myself a cup of tea before bed, I found them sprawled across my furniture, with their shoes on my coffee table, empty beer bottles scattered around the room, and potato chip crumbs ground into my Persian rug. One of Tyler's friends had knocked over a decorative vase that had belonged to my grandmother, and the broken pieces lay scattered across the hardwood floor. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the scene, waiting for someone to acknowledge the mess or apologize for the broken vase. Instead, Tyler glanced up at me with mild annoyance and said, "Oh, hey Nora, we'll clean this up tomorrow." Madison emerged from the kitchen, carrying another round of my beer, and barely made eye contact as she muttered something that might have been an apology. Tyler's friend, a young man with multiple tattoos and a backwards baseball cap, looked directly at me and said, "Sorry about your thing there, lady. Accidents happen. you know." Then he turned back to his game, as if I had already disappeared. That night, I lay in bed, listening to their voices and laughter, until nearly 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling and wondering what Robert would have said about the situation. He had always been better at setting boundaries, at demanding respect without being cruel about it. "Nora," he used to say, "kindness without backbone isn't kindness at all. It's just being a doormat." By the second month, the subtle disrespect had evolved into something much more blatant and hurtful. The rent, which was supposed to be paid by the first of each month, arrived a full week late in March. When I gently mentioned this to Madison, she gave me a bright smile and said, "Oh, sorry, Auntie. We'll have it to you soon. Tyler's just waiting for his paycheck to clear." The casual way she called me Auntie felt patronizing rather than affectionate, as if she were talking to a confused elderly relative rather than her landlord. Tyler had begun inviting friends over almost daily, treating my living room like his personal entertainment center. They would arrive in the afternoon and stay until late evening, commandeering the television, leaving takeout containers on my furniture, and speaking as if I didn't exist when I passed through my own home. When I tried to watch my evening news programs, Tyler would say things like, "We're kind of in the middle of something here," without bothering to look away from his video games. Madison had started going through my belongings with an entitlement that shocked me. I discovered her wearing my pearl earrings, the ones Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary, when I came home early from grocery shopping one day. When I asked about them, she laughed and said, "Oh, these old things. I hope you don't mind. I just borrowed them for a selfie. They look so vintage and authentic on me." She took them off and handed them back, but the damage to my sense of security in my own home was done. I decided it was time for a serious conversation. I knocked on their bedroom door one evening after dinner, my heart pounding with nerves, but my resolve firm. I had practiced what I wanted to say, how to be clear about boundaries, without being harsh or unreasonable. Madison answered the door in a silk robe, her hair wrapped in a towel, and immediately began apologizing before I even spoke. "Nora, sweetie, I know we've been a little scattered lately. We're just going through a rough patch. You know, Tyler's been stressed about work, and I'm dealing with some family drama. We promised to be better housemates." Her words were perfect, exactly what I wanted to hear, delivered with such apparent sincerity that I almost backed down immediately. But then Tyler appeared behind her, shirtless and clearly annoyed at being interrupted. He didn't greet me or acknowledge my presence, just stood there, radiating impatience, until I felt like I was intruding in my own home. I tried to explain my concerns about the noise levels, the shared spaces, and the importance of mutual respect. Madison nodded and made appropriate sounds of agreement, but Tyler rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath that sounded like, "This old lady is really getting on my nerves." The next morning, I posted a polite note on the refrigerator outlining basic house rules. Clean dishes within 24 hours, replace food items that you finish, keep music at reasonable volumes after 10 p.m., and ask before borrowing personal items. It was everything I should have established from the beginning, written in the friendliest possible language. When I returned from running errands that afternoon, I found my note crumpled up in the kitchen trash can. Tyler was sitting at the counter eating cereal directly from my good china bowl, and when he saw me, noticed the discarded note, he shrugged and said, "Seemed kind of unnecessary. We're all adults here." The breaking point came 2 weeks later, when I returned from visiting Sarah in New York. I had been gone for 4 days, and when I walked into my house, it looked like a fraternity after a particularly wild party. Empty bottles covered every surface, There were mysterious stains on my carpet, and my kitchen looked like a tornado had blown through it. But the worst discovery was in my living room, where I found the shattered remains of my wedding china displayed cabinet lying scattered across the floor. The cabinet had contained the set of plates, cups, and serving pieces that Robert and I had received as wedding gifts 35 years ago. Every piece had a story, a memory, a connection to people who had loved us enough to help us start our married life together. Now, it was just fragments of porcelain and twisted metal destroyed by carelessness and disregard. When I confronted Madison and Tyler about the party and the destruction, Madison's apology felt hollow and rehearsed. "Oh my gosh, Nora, I am so sorry. It was just a few friends and things got a little out of hand. We'll totally pay to replace everything, I promise." Tyler didn't even pretend to care, simply shrugging and saying, "Stuff breaks. That's why they make insurance." But the final straw, the moment that changed everything, came when I discovered Tyler's infidelity. Madison had gone to visit her sister for the weekend, and I heard unfamiliar voices coming from their room late at night. The next morning, I saw Tyler escorting a young woman I didn't recognize out the front door, both of them laughing and whispering, like teenagers sneaking around. When Madison returned on Sunday evening, Tyler's betrayal was exposed in the most dramatic way possible. The other woman had left behind a piece of jewelry, and Madison found it on their nightstand. The screaming match that followed echoed through every room of my house, with accusations flying and doors slamming. At one point, Tyler shouted, "This house is like a prison. There's no privacy anywhere. How can anyone live like this?" The implication that I was somehow to blame for his cheating, that my presence in my own home had driven him to infidelity, was so absurd and hurtful that I felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was active cruelty, and I was done being the victim of their selfishness and immaturity. Sunday, March 28th, was supposed to be a special day. It marked what would have been Robert's and my 35th wedding anniversary, and I had planned to honor his memory by cooking his favorite meal, pot roast, with vegetables, the same dish I had made for our first dinner as newlyweds decades ago. I had been looking forward to this quiet celebration for weeks, imagining myself sharing stories about Robert with Madison and Tyler, perhaps creating a new tradition that would help heal some of the hurt that had been building in our household. I woke at 6 a.m. and began the long, loving process of preparing the meal. The chuck roast had been marinating overnight in red wine and herbs, and I spent the early morning hours chopping vegetables with the same careful precision Robert had always admired. Golden potatoes, bright orange carrots, sweet yellow onions, and fresh celery, all cut into perfect, uniform pieces that would cook evenly and look beautiful on the plate. The bread was homemade, kneaded by hand, and allowed to rise slowly, while the roast cooked low and gentle in the oven. I prepared a fresh garden salad with greens from the farmer's market, made Robert's favorite honey mustard dressing from scratch, and even polished the silver candlesticks we had received as a wedding gift. The dining room table was set with my good china, the pieces that had survived Tyler and Madison's party, and I placed a single red rose from my garden in the center as a tribute to Robert's memory. As the afternoon wore on, and the house filled with the rich, comforting aromas of slow-cooked beef and herbs, I felt more at peace than I had in months. This was what a home should smell like what Sunday dinner should feel like. I imagined Robert's approval, could almost hear him saying, "Smells like heaven in here, sweetheart." At 6 o'clock, when everything was perfectly prepared and the table looked like something from a magazine, I climbed the stairs to invite Madison and Tyler to join me. I knocked gently on their door, my heart full of hope that this gesture might mark a new beginning in our relationship. Madison's voice called out, "What?" in a tone that suggested I was interrupting something important. When she opened the door, I could see Tyler behind her, sprawled across their bed, with a gaming controller in his hands, his eyes glued to the television screen. "I've made pot roast for dinner," I said warmly. It was my husband's favorite meal, and today would have been our anniversary. I was hoping you might like to join me downstairs. Everything's ready, and there's plenty for everyone. Madison glanced back at Tyler, who hadn't even acknowledged my presence. "Oh, that's sweet, Auntie, but we're not really hungry right now. Tyler's in the middle of an important game, and I'm doing a live stream for my followers. Maybe later." I tried again at 7 o'clock, knocking softly, and explaining that the food was getting cold. This time, Tyler answered the door, clearly irritated by the interruption. "We told you we're not hungry," he said with exaggerated patience, as if he were talking to a child who couldn't understand simple instructions. "We're busy right now. Can you please just let us be?" By 8 o'clock, I had accepted that they weren't going to join me, but I couldn't bear the thought of all that food going to waste. I carefully packed generous portions into plastic containers, the same containers I had used to send leftovers home with Daniel and Sarah when they were young adults just starting out in the world. I climbed the stairs one final time, balancing the containers carefully, and knocked on their door. When Tyler opened it and saw what I was carrying, his expression shifted from annoyance to something approaching disgust. "We already ordered pizza," he said flatly. "We don't need your old lady food." Behind him, Madison appeared and looked at the containers I was holding. Her face scrunched up as if she were smelling something unpleasant. "Oh, wow," she said with a laugh that cut right through my heart. "That looks really heavy and greasy. Who even eats that kind of food anymore? We're trying to eat clean, you know." Before I could respond, Tyler reached out and took the containers from my hands. For a moment, I thought he was reconsidering, that perhaps he realized how much work and love had gone into the meal I was offering. Instead, he turned and walked directly to the hallway trash can, lifting the lid and dumping both containers inside. The sound of the plastic hitting the bottom of the can was followed by the wet splashing noise of gravy and vegetables scattering across the other garbage. Pieces of tender beef and perfectly cooked carrots spilled out onto the floor around the can, and the sight of Robert's favorite meal spread across the hallway like refuse made my vision blur with tears. Madison burst into laughter, the kind of delighted giggling you might hear from a child who had just seen something genuinely funny. "Oops," she said, covering her mouth with exaggerated surprise. "Sorry, Auntie Tyler's hands must have slipped." Tyler wasn't even pretending it was an accident. He looked directly at me and said, "There, problem solved. No more guilt trips about dinner." Then they both retreated into their room and slammed the door, leaving me standing in the hallway, surrounded by the ruins of my anniversary meal. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 5 minutes, staring at the mess on the floor, while their laughter echoed through the thin walls. Then, moving like a woman in a trance, I got down on my hands and knees and began picking up every piece of food, every drop of gravy, every fragment of the love I had tried to share. When the hallway was clean and the containers were washed and put away, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and made a decision that would change everything. I was done being kind. I was done being understanding. I was done being their victim. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat at my kitchen table until 3 a.m., staring out the window at the empty street and remembering every piece of advice Robert had ever given me about standing up for myself. Honey, he used to say, when someone at the hospital tried to take advantage of my good nature, you can't save people who don't want to be saved. And you sure can't help people who see your kindness as weakness. For 3 years since his death, I had been trying to prove that I could manage on my own, that I didn't need anyone to protect me or fight my battles. But sitting there in the dark, surrounded by the lingering smell of the dinner they had thrown away, I realized I wasn't protecting myself at all. I was enabling 2 people who had mistaken my loneliness for desperation and my kindness for stupidity. At 6 a.m., I called my daughter Sarah in New York. She answered on the second ring, immediately concerned, because I never called that early. When I told her everything that had happened, the months of disrespect, the destroyed belongings, and finally, the humiliation of the thrown-away dinner, Sarah's response was immediate and furious. "Mom, why didn't you tell me any of this sooner?" she demanded. "These people are not your friends. They're not even decent tenants. They're parasites, and you need to get them out of your house immediately." Sarah gave me the contact information for David Hoffman, a real estate attorney she knew through her work. "Call him first thing Monday morning," she insisted. "Don't wait. Don't try to work it out. Don't give them another chance. They've shown you exactly who they are. Believe them." I spent the rest of Sunday researching tenant law in Oregon, reading everything I could find about eviction procedures, tenant rights, and landlord protections. What I discovered gave me the first ray of hope I had felt in weeks, because Madison and Tyler had never signed a formal lease agreement, because our arrangement was based entirely on verbal agreements and text message conversations. They were not technically tenants under Oregon law. They were guests in my home, and I had every legal right to ask them to leave with 24 hours notice. No lengthy eviction process, no court hearings, no months of waiting while they continued to destroy my property and my peace of mind. Just a simple, clear demand that they vacate my premises. Monday morning, I called David Hoffman and explained my situation. He confirmed what I had learned in my research and offered to draft a formal notice for me. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, "you've been more than patient with these people. Now it's time to protect yourself and your property. Send them the notice in writing. Keep copies of everything. And if they refuse to leave, call the police immediately." While I waited for David's email with the legal notice template, I began gathering evidence of the damage Madison and Tyler had caused. I took photographs of stains on the carpet, scratches on my furniture, and the empty spaces where my broken belongings used to be. I made copies of our text message conversations, including Madison's promises to pay for damages and Tyler's dismissive responses to my requests for basic respect. I also did something I had never done before. I prepared myself mentally for a confrontation. I practiced what I would say, how I would stay calm and professional, even if they became angry or tried to manipulate me with tears or promises. I thought about Robert and how proud he would be to see me finally standing up for myself. The most remarkable thing was how Madison and Tyler continued to behave as if nothing had changed. They must have assumed that their cruelty the night before had finally taught me my place, that I would never again dare to challenge their authority in my own home. Tyler invited even more friends over. They took over my living room completely, and Madison helped herself to my expensive face cream without asking. When Tyler's friend made a joke about the old lady who cooks weird food, Madison laughed and said, "Don't worry about her. She finally gets it. She won't bother us anymore." They had no idea that instead of breaking my spirit, they had awakened something in me that had been sleeping for far too long. I spent that evening in my bedroom door closed, preparing the notice that would change our lives forever. Every word was chosen carefully. Every legal phrase was perfect, and every detail was designed to make it clear that this was not a negotiation or a request. This was a lawful demand from a property owner who had reached the absolute limit of her tolerance. Tuesday morning, March 30th. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. with a clarity and purpose I hadn't felt since Robert's death. Today was the day I reclaimed my home and my self-respect, and I was ready for whatever happened next. At exactly 6 a.m., I printed 3 copies of the legal notice David Hoffman had prepared for me. The language was formal and unambiguous. You are hereby notified that your permission to occupy the above-described premises is terminated. You are required to quit and surrender said premises to the undersigned on or before 24 hours from service of this notice. If you fail to quit said premises, legal proceedings will be instituted against you to recover possession of said premises. I placed the notice in an official-looking envelope, along with copies of the relevant Oregon statutes that supported my right to evict guests from my own home. My hands were steady as I sealed the envelope and wrote their names on the front in my clearest handwriting. At 8 a.m., when I knew they would still be sleeping off whatever activities had kept them up until 3 in the morning, I climbed the stairs to their room. I had my phone ready to record their reaction, not out of cruelty, but because David had advised me to document everything in case they tried to claim later that they hadn't been properly served. I knocked on their door firmly and consistently until Madison's voice called out in annoyance, "What do you want now?" When she finally opened the door, wearing an oversized t-shirt and looking like she had just woken up, I could see Tyler still in bed behind her, his eyes closed and his mouth open. "Madison Tyler," I said in the calmest voice I could manage, "I need to give you something important. This is official notice regarding your residence in my home." Madison looked at the envelope I was holding and laughed. "What is this, some kind of bill? Are you charging us extra for cleaning fees now?" She was still smiling as she tore open the envelope, clearly expecting some minor inconvenience she could brush off with her usual combination of apologies and promises. But as she read the first few lines of the notice, her expression changed completely. The color drained from her face, and she called out to Tyler in a voice that was suddenly sharp with panic. "Tyler, Tyler, wake up. You need to see this." Tyler stumbled out of bed, still half asleep, and took the paper from Madison's trembling hands. I watched his face go through the same transformation as he processed what he was reading. Confusion, disbelief, and then growing anger as he realized what was happening. "What the hell is this supposed to be?" he demanded, waving the paper at me. "Some kind of joke? You can't just kick us out. We have rights." I had prepared for this moment, and my response was calm and factual. "You have 24 hours to remove yourselves and all your belongings from my property. This notice is legal and binding under Oregon state law. You were never tenants in this home. You were guests, and I am now asking you to leave." Madison tried her usual manipulation tactics, her eyes filling with tears as she pleaded, "Nora, sweetie, please don't do this to us. We don't have anywhere else to go. We'll be better. I promise. We'll pay for everything we broke." But Tyler's reaction was pure rage. "You crazy old witch!" he shouted, loud enough that I was sure the neighbors could hear. "You can't do this to us. We'll sue you for everything you've got. We'll destroy your reputation online. Everyone will know what a heartless old hag you really are." I let them rant and threaten for several minutes, standing calmly in their doorway while they cycled through denial, bargaining, and rage. When they finally ran out of steam, I delivered the final blow with quiet precision. "You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow morning," I said. "After that, I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Your 24 hours begins now." The rest of Tuesday was a mixture of frantic phone calls and desperate attempts at negotiation from Madison and Tyler. I heard Madison crying to her mother, only to be told, "I warned you about taking advantage of nice people, Madison. You made your bed, now lie in it." Tyler called several friends looking for a place to stay, but apparently burning bridges was a pattern with him because nobody seemed willing to help. They tried everything to change my mind. Madison offered to pay 3 months' rent in advance, though I knew she didn't have that kind of money. Tyler promised to be a model tenant and swore he would never bring friends over again. They even tried to get Sarah's contact information, planning to appeal to my daughter to intervene on their behalf. But I was done being manipulated by tears and promises. Every time they knocked on my door or tried to start a conversation, I simply repeated the same phrase, 24 hours, 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. Nothing they said could change the fact that they had shown me exactly who they were, and I finally believed them. Wednesday morning, March 31st, arrived, gray and drizzly, the kind of Pacific Northwest weather that feels like the sky is crying. I was awake before dawn, sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee and watching the clock move toward 8 a.m. I felt nervous, but not uncertain, anxious, but not regretful. This was the right thing to do, even if it was the hardest thing I had done since Robert's funeral. At 7:30, I heard the sound of footsteps thundering up and down the stairs, doors slamming, and muffled arguments between Madison and Tyler. They were actually leaving. Part of me had wondered if they would call my bluff refuse to go and force me to involve the police. But faced with the reality of legal consequences, they had chosen to pack their belongings and find somewhere else to inflict their chaos. At 7:55, Tyler came downstairs carrying 2 large suitcases and several trash bags filled with their possessions. His face was red with anger and humiliation, and when he saw me sitting calmly at my kitchen table, he couldn't resist one final attempt to hurt me. "You're going to regret this, you miserable old woman," he snarled. "Nobody's going to want to live with a controlling witch like you. You'll die alone in this house, and nobody will even know you're gone until the smell starts bothering the neighbors." Madison followed behind him, tears streaming down her face, trying one last manipulation. "Nora, please," she sobbed. "I'm begging you to reconsider. We learned our lesson, I swear we did. We'll respect you and your house. We'll be the best tenants you ever had." I looked at both of them, standing in my entryway, surrounded by their hastily packed belongings, and felt nothing but relief. These 2 people had brought nothing but stress, disrespect, and destruction into my home. They had taken my kindness for weakness, my loneliness for desperation, and my generosity for stupidity. "Your time is up," I said quietly. "Please leave my property now." Tyler slammed the front door so hard that the windows rattled, and I heard him shouting obscenities as he loaded their things into his beat-up Honda Civic. Madison lingered on the front porch for a moment, perhaps hoping for one final chance to change my mind, but when she saw my face through the window, she must have realized that nothing she could say would make a difference. I watched from my living room window as they drove away Tyler's car, lurching down the street with clothes and belongings spilling out of the overstuffed trunk. When they disappeared around the corner, I felt like I could breathe fully for the first time in months. The house was mine again. The silence was mine again. My dignity was mine again. Over the next few days, I threw myself into reclaiming my home. I scrubbed every surface they had touched, shampooed the carpets they had stained, and repainted the walls of their former bedrooms in cheerful colors that made me smile. I replaced the belongings they had broken with new pieces that reflected my taste rather than trying to recreate what was lost. Daniel called from California to tell me how proud he was that I had finally stood up for myself. "Dad would have loved seeing you kick those losers to the curb, Mom," he said with a laugh. "He always said you had more strength than you knew. I'm glad you finally found it." Sarah sent me a beautiful bouquet of flowers with a card that read, "To the strongest woman I know, welcome back, Mom." The flowers sat on my dining room table, bringing life and color to the space where Madison and Tyler had brought only darkness and disrespect. I learned something profound about the difference between kindness and weakness during those terrible months. True kindness isn't about saying yes to everything or accepting poor treatment to avoid conflict. True kindness is about setting boundaries that protect both yourself and others. Because when we allow people to treat us badly, we're actually enabling them to become worse versions of themselves. I realized that by tolerating Madison and Tyler's behavior for so long, I hadn't been helping them grow or learn. I had been teaching them that their actions had no consequences, that they could hurt people without facing any real cost. In a strange way, forcing them to leave was the kindest thing I could have done for them, even if they would never see it that way. The most beautiful part of my new reality was the peace that filled my home. Bella and I established new routines, quiet evening walks around the neighborhood, lazy Saturday mornings in the garden, and dinners eaten at my own pace without the constant background noise of people who didn't respect my space. I haven't rented the upstairs rooms again, and I'm not sure I will. The extra income would be nice, but the lesson I learned about protecting my peace of mind is worth more than any amount of money. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is guard our own hearts and homes against people who would take advantage of our good intentions. My story doesn't end with revenge or comeuppance for Madison and Tyler. I have no idea where they went or how they're doing, and honestly, I don't care. My victory wasn't about punishing them. It was about reclaiming myself. It was about remembering that I deserve to be treated with respect in my own home, and that enforcing that respect isn't mean or selfish, it's necessary. If you've ever found yourself in a situation like mine, where your kindness was mistaken for weakness and your generosity was repaid with cruelty, I want you to know that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Setting boundaries isn't about becoming hard or cold. It's about protecting your ability to be genuinely kind to people who deserve it. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to remove toxic people from your life? How did you find the courage to put yourself first when everything in you wanted to keep trying to help. Leave a comment below and share your story. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Share this video with anyone you know who might need a reminder that they deserve to be treated with respect. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that kindness with boundaries is still kindness. It's just kindness that lasts. Take care of yourselves out there, and don't let anyone convince you that protecting your peace makes you anything less than strong.